Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt live from Atlanta at the ALEC Conference, American Legislative Exchange Council. Brian Harrison is making me feel old. He's 40 years old. He's had more jobs than anyone should have had at 40, including senior positions in the Trump and Bush administration. We have many common friends that we were just playing Old Home Week. But he's back in Texas representing the 10th District, which is close to cowboy country. It is cowboy country, isn't it?
Just a hair south, that's right.
The Dallas Cowboys. We're not going to talk football with you because I still hate him from Brian, from Bob Hayes' days. Brian Harrison, education has been front and center at ALEC all week, and I think it is a historic opportunity for the Republican Party to seize the initiative to free students from bad public schools or to give them the money that would follow them anywhere and reinforce good public schools. So what's the situation in Texas? You're going to do the Arizona or you're going to do an ESA? What's on the table?
No, it's an incredibly important issue and one that I care passionately about. I'm actually the father of 4 young kids myself. I've got an 8-year-old boy, 6-year-old boy, 4-year-old boy, and a 2-year-old daughter, and they are in public schools.
That girl's going to be ready to handle anything.
She is going to be just fine. She's got the strongest personality of the 4.
Of course.
And they're actually, they attend public schools because I happen to live in a district that does have some great public school options, but not every Texan does. And if the last 2 years of COVID have taught us anything, it's that the educational establishment and the liberal teachers unions do not have the interest of kids at heart. They care far more about indoctrinating the next generation than they do about educating them. And in Texas, we have a problem. I mean, I think only 35% statewide of Texas students are performing at proficiency levels when it comes to mathematics. And that
what percent?
I think it's around 35%. I'll fact check this for you. But that shouldn't be terribly surprising when you think about how monopolists behave. And absent school choice programs, which Texas, sadly, as a freedom-loving state, does not have, competition has not been allowed to do its job, so it shouldn't maybe be too surprising that liberal ISDs, like those in Austin, Texas, are able to spend money on highly sexualized drag queen performances for second-grade students at taxpayer expense. They're able to spend money on drag queens instead of more math tutors because they don't have competition that school choice programs would enable. And I think it would, for the first time, incentivize all these schools to focus on the one thing that should matter, and that's educating kids and making sure that every child or adult, when they walk across that stage and get a diploma at the age of 18, can provide for themselves and provide for a family. And you know what? It was one of the biggest issues in my race. Texas has had a problem. I've got a rural district, and for a long time, the rural parts of the state are concerned about this because the educational establishment has terrified rural Republicans into believing it's going to destroy their schools. But I would say the most pro-public school position you can possibly have is to support school choice. I got elected on the issue, and I look forward to, with reckless abandon, focusing on empowering parents through school choice in the next legislative session coming up in January.
Representative Harrison, I, like every other person who listens to the Hugh Hewitt Show, love Friday Night Lights, right? So high schools are a big deal in Texas. I don't know if you grew up there. Did you grow up there?
I did, yes, sir, native Texan.
And did you go to high school in Texas?
I sure did.
Which one?
Villa Christian School. It's a tiny little school south of Dallas. Graduated with 32 kids. I think we were developing a flag football team at the time. It was not big enough.
But I can imagine that people who are attached to their football clubs in McAllen or
100%.
that they don't want to mess with that, but this doesn't mess with that, right?
If
you do backpack funding, the funding follows the student. They can stay at the high schools that bring their performance up. And if they can hang on to that, their students will go somewhere where they can play football and get a good education at the same time.
The only reason, the argument that you'll often hear is, oh, this will defund public schools. The only public schools that would lose any money whatsoever would be schools that are failing students, and parents choose to put them somewhere else where their kids can get a better education and have a better life. I mean, this is the sad state of affairs. There's so much elitism that permeates the opposition to the school choice movement. They say, oh, you're just going to help, subsidize rich families or whatever. Rich kids in affluent families have school choice today because their parents can afford to send them wherever they want to go to. And I'll never forget, during the height of COVID, this picture went a little bit viral on social media. It was 2 poor kids, obviously from a poor neighborhood, sitting on a curb in front of a Taco Bell with their iPads because they didn't have Wi-Fi at home and their schools were shut down, and that was the only place they could get any kind of internet. And the idea, first of all, that you hand 7-year-olds an iPad Pro and say, look at this for 8 hours and you'll be educated, is farcical. But families who had children in private schools didn't have to go through that.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Some public schools stayed open, and God bless them. But right now, masks are coming back in San Diego Unified Schools, in Minneapolis schools, in Washington, D.C. is considering them as the education bureaucracy, for whatever reason, wants to make it harder for kids to learn, even though the Omicron B5A10, whatever it is not hurting children any more than Delta did, any more than the original did. Brian, in terms of moving something, though,
Yeah.
A lot of Alec's time this week has been spent on this, and you
Yep.
got big breakthroughs like Arizona.
Yep.
That's complete. They're being sued by the teachers union. You got a very aggressive platform run in Florida. West Virginia is doing a lot. Ohio's on the brink of passing a backpack bill. Are you 1 year away, 2 years away, 5 years away from persuading the public?
I love that all those states are enacting these massive parental empowerment programs, and because A, it's empowering the families in those states, but what it's also doing, it's sending a signal to states like Texas that for far too long have been dragging our feet on empowering parents with educational freedom, and we're able to point across the country. I think it's between 20 and 30 states now have enacted these programs. Arizona is lapping the field as far as I'm concerned, and we have 30 million Texans. They deserve this. I think the time is now. If we can't capitalize on it, and I say this and with a little bit of humility, the teachers' unions and the educational establishment in the last 2 years of COVID have done more for the cause of parental empowerment and educational freedom than the proponents of school choice have for the last 20 years.
Whenever anyone acts that proprietary towards anything, you know that they have. I like what you say. It's how monopolies act. I have tweeted out. If people go to my Twitter feed, they will find an article by Leah Beebe, who's with us here, about the radicalization of social studies and how the curriculum across the country has become absolutely, if not overtly anti-American, America skeptical. And I mean, that doesn't fly in Texas, does it?
No, we need to start focusing more. And again, competition would allow us to do this because we would focus on educational outcomes. We have to be focusing on traditional core education, reading, writing, arithmetic, history, economics, and less on the indoctrination and telling kids you're like either an oppressor or oppressed based on the color of your skin. And the fact that these educational systems are able to do that, again, they don't have competition. It's far past time that states like Texas do. We're proud in Texas of liberty and freedom and state sovereignty, and yet we do not allow parents to have the freedom on the one thing that is the most important thing in their lives. I agree with conservative leaders like Ted Cruz that school choice is the civil rights issue of our era.
You know, a couple of Texans, 41 and 43. There's been no better man than H.W. being president, and W. ran to become the education president. 9/11 got in the way, and he had to keep the country safe. Jeb, of course, did education reform in Florida, kind of got the ball rolling. Texas should be fertile ground for this. Now, do you have some Republicans that need to be persuaded, or is it all just Democrats standing in the room?
No. I am optimistic that we can get it done this session. It's traditionally been not so much a Republican-Democrat split in Texas as it has been an urban-rural split. But I really think parents have had their eyes open. For 2 years, they got to watch either online, remote, or because they were home and able to help their kids with their assignments. They were seeing what was going on in the classroom. So as opposed to all the special interests, the taxpayer-funded lobbying organizations that have controlled this and ensured the educational monopoly didn't get broken up, there is a new special interest in town, and they're called parents.
Now, Brian Harrison, the state rep for Texas 10th District in the State House, I believe they had school board elections in Texas in the past year, and I believe that a bunch of incumbents got booted. And I am urging everyone to toss out every incumbent at every school board unless you're absolutely rock solid certain that they are for reform. Like my buddy Dr. Ken Williams in Orange County, he's rock solid conservative for reform. What is going to be the consequence of those school board changes? They firing superintendents? Can they? Do the superintendents have tenure? Because you got to change superintendent. You want woke to be broke. You got to get rid of the people who brought in the dope.
Well, especially when you got some of these superintendents making, I think, close to or over $400,000 a year. But no, federal officials and state officials get all the attention. But I argue all the time when I'm out speaking, the most important elections are your city and your school board elections because those are the epicenter of the battleground for the future of the next generation. And so you're starting to see parents pay more attention to this, and especially after the National Association of School Boards went after, in collusion with the Biden administration, to try and weaponize the federal law enforcement against parents who had done nothing more than had the audacity to show up and speak out against liberal CRT and COVID mandates that were permeating their schools. We finally saw the Texas Association of School Boards joined, I think, most of the rest of the other ones and finally pulled out. But parents have and are going to, I think, continue being much more involved in these local elections, and I think it's absolutely critical for the next generation.
I interviewed Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to do it again in a couple more weeks. And the topic is all education all the time. And his Secretary Gadara was here yesterday. The rule that Youngkin has is we will not teach divisive subjects to young children. And that means we're not teaching human sexuality, we're not teaching race, we're not doing any of this sort of stuff. Does Texas have a curriculum review underway to get the woke out of the schools?
We're focusing on this. The legislature, before I was sworn in, banned CRT, but we are hearing reports all across the state of it creeping up through other means, less overt means, and so we're going to continue to tackle that problem. But I will tell you, Hugh, and maybe you have, I'd love to hear thoughts you may have on this, but I do not understand the liberal teachers unions and some of the professional educational establishments' fixation, almost obsession, with talking about highly sexualized material with second and third graders that don't belong to them.
It's a 90-10 issue. I mean, just like boys participating in girls' sports because they're having a gender dysphoria. 90% of the people think that's not a good idea. We care for and are compassionate towards children who are troubled and making some kind of emotional journey. But that small group of people cannot turn upside down the rest. And so what I understand is on 90-10 issues, when I heard former President Trump and former Vice President Pence on the same day make the same appeal to save girls' sports, I know it's a winner.
And we banned that. It was right after I was sworn in. I think it was the first bill that I co-authored in the Texas legislature, and we actually outlawed boys competing with girls' sports, at least through the 12th grade, and I think we're going to look to actually expand that into college next year in the state of Texas.
And what kind of pushback? The teachers' unions? Because I don't think teachers want this either. It just adds additional conflict to their classrooms. They don't want to do it, but that 10% is very loud and very angry.
They're very loud, and I think there's a big distinction between when we talk about talking about teachers themselves and the teachers' unions. Because most teachers in Texas are great people who are actually conservatives themselves. But the teachers' unions, including in the state of Texas, have had far too much power for far too long. And I look forward to continuing to degrade their influence in the state of Texas.
So, Brian, with 4 young children,
yes,
you've
sir.
got to have schools that work, right? I've got 5 grandchildren now. My kids all went to public school in California. They're great public schools, terrific. I don't know what they're like now, but I do worry about Virginia schools because it's where all my grandchildren live. You got 4... The 3 boys and the girl.
Yeah.
Do you hope that they can go to public school?
I hope that every public school in the state of Texas performs at a level that every parent who wants to send their kids there can send their kids there and have the full confidence that at the age of 18 they will have marketable skills to provide for them and for their families. I send my kids to public school. I am pro-public schools. School choice is not a threat to public schools. And in fact, letting competition work in the marketplace, it would finally do in education what it does in every other sector the government hasn't corrupted, and that over time, quality should be going up and costs should be going down. But because government has a monopoly in education, K-12 in this country, especially in the state of Texas, we're having the exact opposite, where quality is continually going down, price, it's becoming more costly per pupil, and then I would add on another layer, because they're able to behave as monopolists, they're inserting liberal, extreme, woke indoctrination into these children. The left targeted education strategically over a generation ago because they know if they can capture those folks that within inside of a generation, they can turn some of the, including the most fundamental principles that we hold dear as Americans and Texans on their heads, and unfortunately they've been succeeding. It's time for that to stop.
Texas State Representative Brian Harrison, great to meet you. Good luck. Keep keeping us posted on things going on in the great state of Texas. Thank you for joining me. I'll be right back. America from Atlanta, the ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council meeting, rolls on, alec.org. Go get Rich State, Poor State, and follow their education reform page, alec.org. Stay tuned.